Welcome to the Gita in Action podcast. This is Radha, and I'm here with our regular family of seekers. We're a pretty regular family now. It's so wonderful to see you all on Monday and Thursdays. And we are working our way through the Bhagavad Gita. We are going to finish up chapter 5 today. So we'll have gone through 5 chapters. The Gita has 18 chapters. So we're making our way through. We started last August. If you want to catch up, we're on all podcast platforms and YouTube. So catch up with us and come live. And we have a nice topic today. There's a couple things that we're going to talk about today. We're going to cover 3 verses. We're going to start at text 27. So chapter 5, text 27 is where we're going to start. And we're at the end of chapter 5. And in text 27 and 28, Krishna is going to offer a glimpse into a very focused, inward-facing practice called Ashtanga Yoga. So we study all different kinds of yogas in the Gita, and a lot of them kind of build on each other. But Ashtanga Yoga is the yoga of meditation and renunciation. It's the eightfold path. If any of you have studied that, or if you take a yoga teacher training, you study the eightfold path. It's meant for those who step away from worldly life to go deep inside. And that's kind of the focus of verse 27 and 28. He describes a yogi who turns their attention completely inward, controlling their breath, quieting the senses, and aiming solely for liberation. Really, they're meditating on that Paramatma, on the super soul, on God in the heart. So that's what we're going to talk about first, but we're just going to kind of glaze over that to get to the very last verse, because we're going to talk about Ashtanga Yoga a lot in chapter 6. Chapter 6 goes deep into Ashtanga Yoga, so we'll really kind of unpack that there. So today we're just going to kind of have a little glimpse of it. Then we're going to get to the last verse, which is verse 29. And this one verse is so foundational that Prabhupada, the founder of our movement, called it the peace formula. So it's a spiritual roadmap and 3 simple but transformative truths. So it's where Krishna shifts from the impersonal discipline of renunciation to the deeply personal reality of bhakti. So that's what we're going to really focus on today. We're going to explore how this peace can become possible, not by withdrawing from the world, but by reorientating ourselves within it. By remembering who the true center is and where we truly belong. And that's what Prabhupada called the peace formula. So when you walk out of here today, you should be able to say what the peace formula is and how it can bring us this deep peace in our lives. Okay, so with that, let's just get right into 27 and 28. And like I said, we'll just go over these quickly. These are the Ashtanga verses. And then we'll get to the Bhakti nectar in the 29th verse. So Stella, do you want to read that for us?
Sure. Shutting out, excuse me, shutting out all external sense objects, keeping the eyes and vision concentrated between the 2 eyebrows, suspending the inward and outward breaths within the nostrils, and thus controlling the mind, senses, and intelligence. The transcendentalist aiming at liberation becomes free from desire, fear, and anger. One who is always in this state is certainly liberated.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so again, this is Krishna's giving us a glimpse into the Ashtanga Yoga practice, the eightfold practice. And this is an eightfold practice of mystic yoga that he describes in the Gita as a process of controlling the mind and senses, withdrawing from external distractions, and focusing inward, ultimately, again, on the super soul, God in the heart. So it includes disciplines like breath control, meditation, and detachment. And it's a serious step-by-step practice meant for those ready to renounce worldly life and focus entirely on spiritual realization. So that's what he's describing here. This yogi, they're intentionally pulling their senses, the mind, even the intelligence inward, aiming for liberation, for something deeper than the material world can offer. And it may seem like a sharp turn from everything we've been reading about with karma yoga, and engaging in the world, because that's what the focus of this chapter is. But actually, what Krishna's doing here is he's expanding the picture. He's not throwing out the idea of action. He's showing us that renunciation too has a place when it's done with the right consciousness. And a big part of Vedic philosophy is that is kind of the progression as you age, as you get older. There's different focuses in your life, and naturally, when you get to that, your older age, to that elderly time in your life, there's that natural time in your life where you do kind of turn and you become more renounced. And this Ashtanga yoga, this is kind of an option, just like Yan yoga. It's kind of that option. It's kind of that internal, renounced, kind of detaching. And what the Ashtanga yogi's doing is focusing on super soul in the heart. So they're meditating on God in the heart. And that's different than Yan, where they're trying to separate matter from spirit. It's more like a philosophical, intellectual thing. What's happening here in Ashtanga yoga, it's more mechanical, and the focus is on Paramatma, God in the heart. Okay, so that's kind of just a glimpse into Ashtanga yoga, which, like I said, we're going to go deeper into it. We're going to go deeper into it in chapter 6. But again, where in the Gita, Arjuna saw kind of a divide. He saw either you act in the world or you renounce it. Krishna keeps showing him that it's not so black and white, saying you can work in the world with the right consciousness, that's karma yoga, and still move towards liberation. And the Ashtanga yoga, it would be kind of like the next step after karma yoga. Eventually, when you're called to renounce worldly duties altogether, you might turn to this path. You might turn to Yan or bhakti, which is what we really focus on in this podcast. Bhakti can be practiced continuously. Okay, so that's kind of an overview. If it's still a little bit confusing to you, that's okay. We're going to get really deep into it in the next chapter, and you'll be able to walk away with a clear understanding of what Ashtanga yoga is. But just to kind of have that overview. The other thing that Krishna is saying that's pretty profound here is he's saying, when someone reaches this stage of deep inner practice, when they're free from desire, fear, anger, that person is already liberated. He doesn't say they will become liberated. He's saying they already are liberated when they're free from desire, fear, anger. So that's powerful. That's a powerful realization there, that you could become liberated just by becoming free from those things right here. You don't have to wait to go to a higher planet or to end this life. No, we could do it right here. And the other thing that we need to realize and understand here is that this practice is not about rejecting the world out of frustration or bitterness. Sometimes we have a bad experience and we're like, I just don't even care anymore. I'm just gonna kind of what's that word? Recluse? Kind of go in from the world and just kind of do my own thing. I don't even care anymore. Because you have a bad experience. But that kind of renunciation is not really sustainable. Real renunciation, in order for it to be sustainable, it has to come from a genuine attraction to something higher. A longing for spiritual truth, for connection with divinity. So we can't be running away from the world. We have to be running towards divinity. And there's a difference there, right? Because when we're running away from the world, we're feeling a lot of attachment to the outcome, right? We're feeling we're feeling a lot of like anxiety, frustration, attachment, right? But when we're running to divinity, we're feeling shelter, right? We're feeling peace. We're feeling contentment with where we are and wherever we end up. And that's the difference there. And so that's so important to note, just the difference between what real renunciation is. Okay, so in these verses, Krishna is preparing us for what's to come. Okay, he's bridging the path of action with the path of renunciation. And he's going to now show us how bhakti yoga is not only the culmination, but it's a path that can be practiced right here, right now, without even needing to withdraw from the world or anything like that. So that's where we're heading. And with that, let's get into this next verse, to the final verse of chapter 5, text 29. This is what Prabhupada called the peace formula. And he would even like print this on pamphlets to distribute this peace formula. So let's get right into it. If anybody wants to share anything about 27 or 28 before we do, feel free as well. Okay. Stella, can you take us home here?
Sure. A person in full consciousness of me, knowing me to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, the supreme lord of all planets and demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, attains peace from the pangs of material miseries.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Okay, so these truths, they kind of dismantle the core causes of conflict. It's we oftentimes think conflict is outside of us. If only this person would stop acting like this. If only these circumstances would be different, right? But Prabhupada's really getting to the root of this core causes of conflict, which is self-centeredness, competition, false ownership, and mistrust. And this is whether it's global wars or just personal anxiety. Prabhupada's teaching us that the root cause is spiritual ignorance. And so when we understand and live by this formula, we experience peace within and naturally contribute to the peace around us. So that inner light shines out. And that's this peace formula. Okay, so this is a big statement, but let's break it down and make it real here. Okay, so Krishna gives us three powerful truths in this verse. And if we don't just understand them in our heads, but really take them into our hearts, and there's a difference there, right? Peace becomes possible. Okay, so what are these truths? These truths are that God is the enjoyer, God is the owner of everything, and God is our dearest friend. Okay, I'll say these truths again. God is the enjoyer, He's the owner of everything, and He's our dearest friend. And if you want a fun acronym to remember these truths, you could think CEO. Right? C for the controller, E for the enjoyer, and O for the omnibenevolent. Right? He's our dearest friend. Okay, so they sound pretty simple when we hear them. We're like, oh yeah, okay, I know that about God. I get it. Check. Right? But the truth is, if we're really being honest, we're often subconsciously resisting these truths in our everyday lives constantly, right? But they're so incredibly powerful that if we begin to really realize them, if we could kind of etch away at them, we'll start to see things shift in our lives. So let's break down each one of those a little bit more so that we can start to notice when we're out of sync with them and how we can move closer to living in alignment with them. Because that's really what this is about. We're coming here, we're not just learning, theory. We're learning how we can apply it to our lives, how we can see it in our lives, and how it can transform our lives and our relationships, and ultimately our relationship with God. Right? Okay, so let's start with He's the ultimate enjoyer. Okay, that's the first one we're going to unpack. Krishna's the ultimate enjoyer. So we know, we're not meant to be the sole enjoyers of our life, doing our own thing, completely separate from God. When we even try to enjoy independently, we inevitably hit a ceiling, because our ability to enjoy is limited, just by design, just by the way we're made. It's finite. The pleasure fades, the satisfaction slips away, and we're left wanting more. This is just life. My husband and I were watching this show last night, and there's this couple, they've been married for 10 years or whatever, and they were worried that the spark was fading. And so they were trying to do all these things to like increase the spark. And I said to my husband, like, this is just the natural evolution of relationships. It's like Hollywood teaches us that it should always be just the super sparky, and as soon as it's lost, people like either give up and go find someone new, or they get resentful. It's like, it's not that needs to change, it's that our expectations of what this is needs to change. This is the way that material energy is. Even if we get some intense enjoyment at the beginning, it's naturally, our capacity to enjoy is limited, and these things are going to fade. This is the way that it's made, right? But when we connect with Krishna, when we connect with God, this is unlimited. Like it never fades, it never gets stale. When our joy aligns with his, our happiness deepens. It expands. It's like plugging into an infinite power source instead of relying on our own tiny battery, because that's what we are. We're little tiny batteries. And we forget that we actually need to plug into this infinite power source for sustaining happiness and fulfillment. And we go off and we think that this little charge is enough for us. And when it's not, we get upset, we get depressed because we just don't have this full knowledge. And even if we have this full knowledge, we don't realize it. So that's why peace begins when we accept that Krishna is the true enjoyer. We're meant to enjoy with him, not apart from him. And the struggle is that we want to be the enjoyer, right? We want control. So when we have all these plans and expectations and they don't live up, our plans fall apart, nobody can meet our expectations, resentment starts to creep in. And this is natural. This is what happens when we're running off of our own battery and thinking that we don't need a charge. Right? Sometimes our resentment, we resent other people. We get angry at other people for obstructing our plans, for not meeting our expectations. And this just only breeds more pain, right, for them and for us. Sometimes this resentment will turn inwards. We'll blame ourselves. This is when we really think that we're the controller, right? We'll take responsibility for everything. We'll blame ourselves. We'll feel like failures. Maybe we spiral into depression or self-loathing, and we have a low self-esteem because our expectation is that we're God and we're just not living up to that for some crazy reason, right? And then sometimes we'll resent God. We'll turn upwards. So this resentment, it's just so toxic. This resentment, it can go in any direction. It can go outwards towards other people. It can go inwards towards ourselves, or it can go upwards to God. But no matter where it lands, it's building a wall. That's what this resentment is. It's just gradually building a wall. And the worst thing is when it builds a wall between us and God. And even when God wants to help, that wall keeps us from receiving his grace. And this is what happens when we think that we're the enjoyer, when we think that we're the controller. This resentment builds, and it's such a strong wall. You can't even see over the top of it, right? And it keeps us from receiving God's grace. And what happens is, we see this with people. When we hold resentment towards someone, think of somebody that you have a lot of resentment for. Now think of, when they try to help you, we just can't even accept it. We don't even want anything to do with them, right? Even if they're reaching out with love, we're so shut to it. It's like we're not even letting them pass that wall. And that's what happens with God. This is what happens with God. And it's all stemmed from this misunderstanding that we are the enjoyer, we're the controller. Things aren't going our way, and that's a problem. That's a problem. But the reality is, God knows, he has our best interests at heart. And even when he's trying to help us, if we're so focused, we're so steeped in this narrative, we're not going to experience it. And we actually need his help. Life's going to throw reversals and obstacles. This is just the nature of material energy. And we can't handle it on our own. But if we have this resentment built up, and it could be subconscious, we may not even know it. Could be subconscious. We're not going to experience that grace. We're not going to experience that help. And this help comes through spiritual knowledge and faith, through understanding, however gradually, that God is our well-wisher. Whatever he allows in our lives is ultimately for our good, even if we don't see it at first. And with time, these things start to make more sense. Until then, we have to hold on with patience and faith, because we might not always understand, when something doesn't go our way, immediately our first, knee-jerk reaction might be, oh, this is terrible. What's happening? What's this? And instead of, when you feel yourself want to go into this loop of negativity, or this didn't turn out the way that I wanted it to. Or you could go the other way and try to like make all of these excuses, to compensate, like whatever direction that you're going. Instead of that, just accepting maybe even in that moment that there is some level of uncertainty, that you don't really understand what's going on or why it's happening, but you trust, right? You trust. We trust in God's plan. We trust that there's a benevolent God looking out for us, benevolent God looking out for us, who has our best interest at heart. And that's another one that we're going to get into is that God's our biggest well-wisher. But if we often go through life thinking, I want to enjoy this, I deserve to enjoy that, the Gita reveals to us, again, that God's the supreme enjoyer. And this isn't because he's selfish, but because everything and everyone finds fulfillment through connection with him. He's the center, and not like the fake center, like when we want to be the center so that we can be God. We can get all the accolades, we can get all the attention, we can feel loved. We mistakenly think that if we're the center that we're going to get all of those things. When the reality is that God needs to be the center. God needs to be the center. And that's because everybody feels fulfillment through connection with him. So that's just the rightful, position, situation. And if we think about it, when we think that we're the center, everything becomes pressure. It's constantly like, okay, am I getting what I want? Is this making me happy? But when we shift our mindset, when we realize that life isn't about everything revolving around us, but about serving the one everything that everything belongs to, we start to feel relief. But some of us, we're so rooted in this, this feeling like life should revolve around us. It should go to my schedule. It should go to my plan. And when it doesn't, we're honestly confused. It's like perplexing. But we really have to change our narrative here to that's not what life's, that's not the purpose of life here. It's not how can I manipulate material energy best so that it's in line with my ideal. That's us putting God at the center. It's accepting that God's in the center and God's in control. And we have very small amount of influence. And with that, we do our best. But then we accept. And this is how we experience the ultimate fulfillment and happiness. Just like watering the root nourishes the whole tree. We don't go and I have a garden right now. I don't go out and water my kale leaves. No, I water the root of my kale. And this is what nourishes the leaves. In the same way, when Krishna enjoys, when we water the root, we enjoy too. We're the leaves. Our happiness, it's not diminished by surrender, but it's expanded. Because instead of endlessly chasing pleasure, we become connected to its very source. Because we are by nature the leaves, and God is the root. And so we have to water the root for the leaves to be nourished. And it's such an illusion, such a mistake, stinking thinking. I have a teacher that says that. It's stinking thinking to think that if we water the leaves, that the plant will grow. But we get so trapped in that. So with this one, it's like the next time that you have a letdown in your life, that things don't go the way that you wanted them to, or maybe you're going through something like that right now. Remember this, try to hold on to this with patience and faith, and try to be okay just standing in that uncertainty, right? I really don't know why this is happening. It doesn't make sense to me, but I'm going to trust. I'm going to trust that this is part of God's plan for me. And guaranteed over time, it may be a month, it may be a year, it may be several years, but there'll be a time that you'll look back and that will make more sense to you. But we have to have that patience and that faith, because if we don't, the wall is too strong, too thick, too tall for the grace to flow in. So that's the first, let's say, pillar of the peace formula. Krishna is the enjoyer. Does anybody want to share anything?
I'll share quickly. I was just reading yesterday in teachings of Lord Chaitanya about how, and I know not everyone, knows of these pastimes, but, Radha, Krishna's consort, she's expanded from Krishna just to give Krishna pleasure, and not in the material sense that we think, but her whole being was created just to give Krishna pleasure. And then from Krishna and Radha, every other being is expanded out of the Lord. And so we are literally part and parcel of this Supreme Lord, created just to give him pleasure in whatever way that we are meant to, right? And I was just meditating on that yesterday, so it's really cool that this is coming up today, because and that's why it's when we're chanting, when we're reading, it's like how can I serve you, Krishna? What is my natural position? Like what do I get to do that gives you happiness? And that's when we are the most happy, is when we learn what it is that we get to do that makes Krishna the most happy. We're the most happy because that is our natural position. Like that is what we are literally created for. And yeah, so I'm just having deeper realizations on that. And I feel like there was something else I wanted to say along the lines of that, but it's not coming to me now, so I'll stop there. But yeah, it's such a beautiful thing when you can surrender to, like, oh, I'm gonna be happiest once I figure out what it is that I'm meant to do to make Krishna happy.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Stacy.
I was listening as you were sharing, and I agree with what you just said. It's when I get out of my own way, and when I realize, like, I am literally here for Krishna, for that pleasure, to serve my deities, to serve to do service at the temple, to serve everybody. And um and I love the idea of when you carry that resentment, that person comes to you, you're not having it, right? But unfortunately, like you were saying, I think what I was identifying with is yesterday I gave a yoga class, and I was talking about how people so easily, so quickly are willing to just throw a marriage away, throw a friendship away, because just what you said, the excitement, oh my goodness, it's not there anymore. Oh my God, we just met, we're so in love, everything's so great. Okay, yeah, that is not how the that's not the way you're meant to feel your whole entire life. We were talking about how, like, she said to me, how are you? And I said, like, I'm really in a different place. I'm in like doing my sadhana, a lot of spiritualization, a lot of meditation, a lot of chanting. Like, it's just, I'm not in that place anymore. And you know what? I'm so happy. And my husband is happy. My husband sees how happy I am being in service of Krishna, that he's happy. So he doesn't, he's just, he doesn't have to be a part of it, but he just sees that. And so, what happens is we're now happy because
Because you're both
we no
happy.
longer right? Like, we no longer feel like we have to be in this ecstasy of the day we first met, our first week together. We're not supposed, that's not how life's meant to be in my understanding of the Gita.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for sharing, Stacy. Thank you. And okay, that's going to bring us to the second part of the peace formula. So we just did the E in the CEO. We just did the E. We're kind of going out of order relative to that, but E, enjoyer. Okay, now the second part is the owner of everything. Okay, Krishna's the owner of everything. And this is a big one. We tend to get very attached to my house, my job, my child, my success. But the Gita gently reminds us that none of this is really ours. We're caretakers, not owners. God is the actual proprietor of everything in existence. And when we have this mentality, just having this mentality that we're caretakers, that we're not owners, it makes us less of a jerk, doesn't it? Doesn't it? If we can have this mentality, even in raising kids, it makes you a better parent. If you could take this possessive mentality out of what you're doing, because that's where the ego gets involved, that this is mine, it needs to be this way, and people feel that, and it's yuck. And so, and this might feel a little bit threatening at first. You may not like this idea. Like, what are you talking about? These are my kids, right? Like we're being told to give everything up. But it's actually a huge relief. If we're not the owners, we're also not the ultimate controllers or responsible for everything. This for me is a huge relief because I grew up always feeling responsible for everything, to the point where I believed I was the controller. I was the ultimate controller. I was like, get out of the way, God, here I come. But it's so nice to know that's not even your role. Best case scenario, you do your part. You do your part sincerely and with care, with heart. But don't carry the whole weight on your shoulders, because you're just a tiny little part of the equation of how things actually work out. Even if you do your absolute best, the best thing ever, the result, the final result, is not ultimately in your hands. So you're not the controller. And this should make us kind of like sigh some relief. It should just kind of bring some relief to us. So in this perspective, it also helps us let go of this possessive mentality and anxiety. When we remember that everything belongs to God and is meant for his purpose, it makes us feel more grounded, more grateful, more peaceful. For those of us that tend to be a little bit self-conscious. Anybody else tend to be a little bit self-conscious at times? Right? Gita wisdom helps with that. It gives us a clear understanding of our place and our purpose in the bigger picture. We're all finite beings. We're all finite beings. I like to say we're all just doing the best that we can, with finite capabilities, finite vision. We're not God. Okay, we need to understand this. We're not God. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's the way we're built. But when we become overly focused on our flaws or what we can't do, it can really weigh us down. It's like carrying a heavy burden that just slowly crushing our confidence and draining our energy. So the way out of this is to shift the focus away from ourselves. We need to become conscious of something bigger than ourselves. And this is where the Gita comes in. It teaches us that our lives are meant for a higher purpose. We're not isolated little units trying to prove our worth. It's almost like funny to even think that, but that's what we do. But we're parts of God. We're parts of something bigger. We're parts of the supreme reality. And when we take on our roles and responsibilities with the spirit of service, something powerful happens. And he starts to empower us. He starts to empower us. He starts to work through us. We because we're endeavoring to act in this role as parts and parcels, as parts of God, as servants of God. He uses us as instruments, in his service. And then we begin to see that, and we begin to see that despite our shortcomings, we can still make a difference. We can still contribute something. And so that shift from being caught up in self-consciousness to stepping into service consciousness, it's incredibly empowering. It's not about denying our weaknesses. It's about realizing that they don't define us. And when we can connect to something higher, we can rise above them. So this difference from self-consciousness to service consciousness, there's like an element of surrender there, in this transition, an element of surrender. As I'm taking myself out of the center and I'm putting something bigger than myself in the center, and I'm rightfully serving it. Because again, I'm the leaf. I'm not the root. We have to water the root. So that's what this verse is telling us. This verse is telling us that the world belongs to God, and it's meant for service. And it's funny because people tend to relate to the world in one of three ways. The first way they might see the world as a place for their enjoyment. In this view, God's role is basically to support their desires, to protect them, and provide whatever they think that they will make them happy. And if that doesn't happen, then resentment's going to build, just like we talked about. That's kind of the first. This place is meant for my enjoyment. God needs to support that. Okay, the second is kind of the other side of the coin to that one. It's seeing the world as a miserable place. It just causes suffering. People with this mindset, they'll believe the pleasures of the world are just bait, things that lure you in and trap you. It's kind of like negative. And their main goal is to escape the world entirely. But the third view, this is the more evolved perspective. And this is seeing God as the center of existence and the world as a place meant for his service. And this is the bhakti perspective. Bhakti teaches us to see the world as an arena where we can express love for God through service, through offerings, and even how we respond to life's ups and downs. So in this vision, worldly pleasures, they're not inherently bad. They're just distorted reflections of the real lasting joy found in loving God. So when we lovingly offer the resources of the world to God, this devotional contact with the all pure Lord purifies us. Okay? When we offer things to God, this contact purifies us, and this purification starts to peel away the layers of ignorance and forgetfulness that have obscured us from realizing our spiritual identity. So as we start to peel those layers off and we start to realize our spiritual identity, we understand that rendering devotional service to God is our natural, eternal activity as his beloved children. And this is how we start to rise from this self-realization to God-realization. And how we start to discover all the peace and joy that we were constantly looking for externally. We start to realize that it was inside us all along. So according to the Gita, this is the most complete and mature way to see the world. Because with this vision, we don't need to reject the world. We don't need to cling to the world, make it mine. We can stay spiritually grounded while living right in the middle of it. And we all know people like this, people that have been practicing this path for, decades, lifetimes, and they have a certain level of groundedness about them. They're not clinging. They're not like overly upset or anxious about the way something's going to turn out. And at the same way, they're not completely disengaged, like I don't care. It's not my problem. But they're diligently working, engaging with a level of care and compassion, but they're not so attached. And this is the evolved perspective that the Gita is trying to help us perfect. So that's the second one. That's owner. That's ownership. So God is the enjoyer. God is the owner. Controller. If you're doing the CEO analogy. Okay, before we move to the last one, does anybody want to share anything? Stella.
Yeah, that I was when you were saying that about the, being not having to be the owner of the world or your stuff. It's like being able to live in the palace without having to own the palace and all the taxes and the trouble of maintaining it. It's like you don't have, because I've known a lot of really wealthy people, and they really are anxious. They don't want to lose a single dollar. It's, and they're not satisfied. If you even look, like, there's so many millionaires that are on drugs. Like, why would you even take drugs if you have that much money and houses? Shouldn't you be completely happy? And they own all that, and then they're anxious that they'll lose even a little bit of it. Like
Right.
it becomes like their identity. Like if they, have to pay another billion in taxes, they'll lose their own identity. It's like, but they're not using those dollars to serve, like,
Yeah.
which
No,
could cause them to really be happy.
yeah, the fact that acquiring stuff and feeling all of this responsibility for ownership of all of these
Yeah,
things gives us anxiety.
it's
It's such a
anxiety
testament.
producing. Yeah,
Yeah, it's such a testament to like, okay, something's off. We're not designed for this. This
right.
mentality is hurting us. But we don't get it, you know. If something hurts us outside, if we walk outside and we, stub our toe or whatever, we know it hurts us. This is hurting us. This is causing us pain. But this, it's like we're addicts to it. It gives us anxiety. Okay, I want more. The solution is I need more. It's like ludicrous. Yeah, I totally agree. Thank you. Anybody else before we move on to the last pillar of Prabhupada's peace formula? Okay, this one's really sweet. This last one. This final one is that God is our best friend. God is our best friend. The Gita tells us that Krishna is not some distant cosmic force. He's our closest well-wisher. He's our constant companion. He's the friend who never leaves. Unlike our human relationships, which can sometimes be conditional or fall apart, Krishna's love is unconditional. He knows everything about us, our flaws, our confusions, our mistakes, things we even try to keep from ourselves. He knows. And still, he stays right with us. He stays right in our heart. And when we feel unloved or abandoned or misunderstood, this truth can be incredibly healing. That God's always there, right, ready to guide us, uplift us, and walk with us. Even when nobody else sees what we're going through, he sees. When no one else knows what to say, he listens. When we mess up and we feel unworthy, he waits patiently, still loving us. And this can be kind of difficult for some of us to accept, if like maybe you're a little kid and maybe times you felt unloved because, maybe your parents were too busy or distracted to spend time with you. I know this happened to me. And if this happens often enough, you might start to wonder, what's wrong with me? You might start to develop this belief like that you're unlovable. And then this can kind of compound on itself into adulthood. And this kind of deep emotional pain, it can make us hard to trust or even like fathom a higher being that loves us unconditionally. Especially when this kind of pain has accumulated to the point where we've taken it on as our own and we don't even love ourselves. It's like we can't even fathom what that is, what that would be like. But this is what the Gita is telling us. God is that being. He's our eternal well-wisher. His love for us, it doesn't depend on our performance, our status, whether we've got it all together. It's not based on who we are. It's based on who he is. I love that line. I think that's in like a Christian song. Not because of who I am, but because something. If anybody knows this Christian song, I think it's a really popular one. I used to love Christian music when I was growing up. Anyway, side note. It's not because of who we are that he loves us. It's because of who he is. And who he is love. Pure, unwavering, unconditional love. And we see how he loves us in what he's created here. He's created this entire world as this arena where we can just play out our desires until we mature in wisdom. He's created this whole thing for us so that we can play out our desires. Just like, a parent who gets their kids a little miniature kitchen so that they can pretend cook until they can mature in wisdom. And to maintain order in this world and to stimulate our spiritual growth, he'll come down. He comes down. He descends repeatedly. And he also sends many representatives. He constantly accompanies us in our heart as the super soul, in each and every one of us, guiding us through the voice of conscious and inspiration towards wise choices. He even orchestrates circumstances externally to demonstrate to us the wisdom he's teaching us through scripture. So he gives us a scripture. He says, hey, here it is. Just like the Gita. Hey, here it is. But many of us are super hard-headed and need to learn it on our own. So he says, okay, I'll orchestrate some of these circumstances so that you can learn these lessons another way. because you're not taking to the scripture. I get it. Try this. He doesn't give up on us. And depending on what's best for our growth, he expresses his love differently at different times. But his intentions always remain loving. This is how loving of a God that we have. And then he always remains that way. He doesn't get frustrated that, okay, I gave you some scriptures, you're not getting that. I gave you association, you're not getting that. Okay, I'll give you some circumstances. Maybe you can learn through those. He keeps giving us opportunities to get wise, to get over playing with that little kitchen, with that little miniature fake kitchen. He's trying to get us out of this matrix. And instead of accepting it, instead of turning to him, serving him, what are we doing? We're turning the opposite way. We're trying to be our own little mini controllers in charge of our lives because we know best, right? Our scale of happiness is like tiny, but we think that we know what the utmost happiness is. And we don't want any part of that. That's what we're doing. But when we start to turn towards him through spiritual practice, even just a little bit, something amazing happens. This connection gives us a sense of emotional security that no one can take away. And this emotional security, it acts like this inner anchor for when we face life's challenges, or relationship struggles. We can show up with more maturity, with more clarity, with more strength. We can let go of unhealthy patterns. We can work on healing where it's possible. We can open ourselves up to new, healthier connections. This is what this relationship with divinity can do for us. It can give us this emotional security that serves as this inner anchor that stays with us through all of these challenges. And this is where this peace comes from. This inner relationship. That's where this peace comes from. It doesn't come from controlling the external world. Right? Because the external world is constantly changing. That's the nature. That's the nature. Okay? It's going to say it in scriptures. If you don't get it, God's going to throw you a bunch of things until you can get a little bit more comfortable with it, because that's the nature of external world, of material energy. But real peace is internal. And it comes from not controlling the external world, but from surrendering our need to be the controller and trusting that God has our best interests at heart, even if we don't understand it in the moment. And Krishna's ways, they might not always feel pleasant in the moment. They might not always feel pleasant. They probably won't. Sometimes it really hurts when things get taken away from us that we thought we desperately needed. Maybe a relationship, maybe a job. But we have to understand that it's always in our best interest. It's natural when it happens to question, does God really care about me? Why is this happening? But in these moments, it's so important to pause and to understand the difference between what feels good and what actually is good for us. Like in surgery, like even if it's a skilled surgeon who's working on somebody, it can still be pretty painful and uncomfortable. But oftentimes that pain is necessary for healing, and sometimes even to save our lives. Okay, so in the same way, God may guide us through situations that challenge us or even hurt us, but they're ultimately meant to help us grow. Because we're not just these bodies. We're not these bodies. Not our mind, not our bodies, not your emotions. We're eternal souls. That's what we actually are. And what might seem unpleasant at the bodily or emotional level can actually be deeply beneficial for our spiritual development. I think about actually some of the most painful situations I've gone through in my life were times that I grew the most spiritually, and I'm so grateful for that now. And so that's how we have to see it sometimes when we're in the midst of it, when we are just feeling completely cut open head to toe and we're just raw. We have to see it like that. We have to have the perseverance to understand that this pain is just temporary. And God is preparing us for something much greater. And if we can have the foresight to just kind of hold on to this perspective, even if we're not feeling it in the moment, even if we're just feeling raw and pain and vulnerable, right? But if we could just hold on to it, what it'll do is it opens our heart to this powerful truth that what's unpalatable today might be preparing us for something beautiful tomorrow. Because the reality is, we don't fully understand our own attachments, let alone how to free ourselves from them. Sometimes we have attachments and we think we need it so desperately, and it's actually not even really good for us. Right? Anybody else ever fall into that trap? Right? But Krishna knows. God knows. So it only makes sense to trust him with that process. Right? Even when it's hard, even when it's painful. Because just like a patient has to tolerate some pain during surgery, we may have to endure some discomfort, as Krishna's working on our hearts, because he's a heart surgeon. And it might be a little bit painful at first. But we can face it with what I like to call devotional optimism. The faith that God is always working for our highest goal, even if we can't see it. And if we're patient, again, we'll often find that over time, the wisdom behind those painful moments, it becomes clear. And our faith will grow stronger because of it. Right? So the amazing thing about God consciousness is that it brings us into spiritual life now. Even while we're still living in this material world. It's like waking up to a deeper reality right in the middle of ordinary life. And the more that we practice, the more that we start to feel free from things that usually weigh us down, like stress, attachment, the noise of the mind. And this happens just by understanding and realizing this peace formula, that God's the controller, God's the enjoyer, and he's omnibenevolent. Why can't I say that word? Benevolent. He's our well-wisher. He's the controller, and he's the enjoyer. He's not playing favorites. He's not blessing some people and ignoring others. It all just comes down to how sincerely we engage with our spiritual practices. And the more that we live with awareness, offer our actions to him, and try to keep our hearts connected, the more that we're able to manage the things that usually trip us up, like uncontrolled desires or flashes of anger. And this is the peace formula. When we stay steady in our God consciousness, when we do our best to stay centered and connected, we'll gradually rise above the turbulence. We begin to taste this kind of peace and clarity that's beyond the ups and downs of everyday lives. And what's even more interesting is that practicing this, it naturally includes the essence of all the steps of traditional yoga, like we were talking about Ashtanga, like self-discipline, breath work, meditation, concentration. Instead of going through them one by one over years of intense effort, which you can do, Krishna consciousness, it gets to the heart of the matter right away, this devotion, the essence, because ultimately the purpose of all those practices is to connect with divinity. Is to that devotional heart. And this is what brings real peace. Not just this temporary calm, but this lasting sense of fulfillment. The connection with God, it's the highest goal of life, and everything else just leads up to it. Right? So this is what bhakti offers. We don't have to run away from the world to connect with the spiritual. We could be in the world, doing our duties, navigating relationships, facing challenges, but we can do it with this devotional intention. We can remember the CEO, this peace formula when we're doing that. And it will be a game changer to everything in our lives. We'll see if we can imbibe these realizations, this knowledge. So just to kind of conclude here, in this closing verses, Krishna is giving us two powerful reminders. Okay, first, that peace is possible, not someday, not in some distant heaven, but here and now. And second, that peace doesn't come from perfecting breath work or escaping responsibilities. It comes from these three simple truths. Anybody want to try these three simple truths? This peace formula truths. Krishna is the
Controller.
Enjoyer,
CE.
omnipotent, or
Omnibenevolent.
omnibenevolent.
Yes.
I'm thinking
Perfect.
CEO. That's good.
Well wisher.
Perfect. Yes, yeah, that's really what the O is, but that's the word that we use for the O. But yeah, or well-wisher. So and these truths, they're simple in words, right? But they're revolutionary when we live them. You know, they can dismantle our need to control, our compulsion to compare, you know, our fear of being unloved or unseen. And they can guide us into this place of surrender. And not the kind that feels like defeat, but the kind that feels like coming home. And this is where bhakti shines through. You know, it's not as no one option among many, but as the thread that ties everything together in terms of different yogic paths that we're going to learn about in the Gita, and which are all valid and wonderful. But bhakti is the thread that ties everything together. Right? Whenever we act in the world, you know, when we withdraw in meditation or stumble somewhere in between, the Gita keeps inviting us back to relationship. That's the place where all these paths lead, you know, back to Krishna, back to love, because that's where the real peace is born. Okay? Not in our outer circumstances, but in the heart that knows that I'm not alone. I'm not the controller. And I'm deeply, deeply and endlessly loved. So that's what we get out of this final verse of the 5th chapter, Prabhupada's peace formula. Does anybody want to share anything? Okay.
I mean,
Oh no. Yeah, I think your service is not great because I can't hear you.
it was so, okay.
Oh no.
It is so good to know.
Oh, now you're on mute. Okay, let's try again.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So the entire class, the lecture was so good to hear everything about Krishna and how just by connecting with him, we can also be the enjoyer with him, because he is our best friend and he wants us to be in peace. And in today's lecture, it was about, we don't have to wait until after we die. We can be in the spiritual world right now if we can connect with Krishna. That is such a beautiful statement, I thought.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kay.
I wanted to say, one of the things my Guruji was saying was that, we can't. It's not that we can't enjoy, but if we're enjoying in connection to Krishna, then that's you're enjoying, but your enjoyment is it's triple, quadruple. You're enjoying even more. But if you're enjoying because you're like, hey, I got this house. This is my house, and look at how cool I am. It's a different type of enjoyment. In fact, it's not even something that tastes good anymore. Like, it's something that once you really read this and you really start to live it, right, Kay? It's not something that you enjoy. Oh, look at it's not, it's like, oh, you look at maybe other people and just go, wow, I hope that they find Krishna too, or I hope that they find this connection to divine, and of course our connection more is Krishna. But if when you're enjoying a lot of those things that you said about like the low self-esteem, all those, like, they don't matter anymore. Like, I feel good in my own skin. I'm as long as I'm devoting myself and serving my guru and serving Krishna, I'm good. And it's like there's a smile across this face. It's a different, and people that know me know, they're like, wow, like they can see a change, and that's, I think, where sometimes we can't always see it. I mean, I feel it. Um, and I think at the end of the day, that's really the most important thing, is not people seeing it, but me internally feeling closer to Krishna. right? Right? Look at Kay. Kay's like she's ready to explode.
It's just such a different feeling just by connecting with Krishna. I mean, even the house or all those things we own, we have that feeling that, okay, it's all because of him and for him.
Yeah. Brings so much peace. So much peace to
Peace.
the mind. Thank you. Thank you both. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to share before we end for the day? Okay. Well, I hope you can all take this peace formula with you through your day and through the week, and use it to obtain a little bit more peace in your life, both internally and then externally, because it's resonating out. So thank you for coming, and I'll see you all Monday. I always forget what day it is. I'll see you all Monday.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.